is focused on top 3 things to know about Airless Job. It's sort of focused as an introductory session to Airless. If you're currently an Airless user, you may find this useful, or it may be things that you already know. However, we can take questions, general questions about Airless Job as well. We're happy to answer them or get you an answer if we don't know those off the top of our head. Okay. So we'll talk about sort of the what probably are kind of the 3 main distinct abilities of Airless Job above and beyond standard Business One. And probably one of the things to know about Airless Job that isn't on this list is that when we say Airless Job, what we're talking about is a kind of a completely baked in add-in for SAP Business One. So the Airless Job module just shows up in your Business One screen as just another module on the side menu bar, and we'll show you that right away. So it's not a separate application. It's not something that's launched from SAP. It's embedded into SAP. And of course, Business One has a set of functionality that allows you to set up customers, do quotes, do orders, do invoices. There's even the idea of a project code inside of Business One, but Airless takes that functionality and takes it quite a bit further. So you can do simple project accounting, simple project costing in standard Business One, but you can't do things like, it doesn't work as well for things like an estimating tool or tracking real-time costs because there are limitations to what you can track in standard Business One. So for instance, an individual timesheet, which is coded against a job, or the ability to do sort of more advanced billing schemas. We'll show you that in this webinar. Okay, so that's it for the super engaging PowerPoint slide. We'll switch over to our demo system here, and we'll take a look at SAP Business One running Airless Job. So I'm logged into the cockpit as the manager of the system, and this may not look like your Business One cockpit, but just to let everybody know, I'm using an SAP system running on HANA, but I don't have the HANA web sort of Fiore dashboard enabled. I've got that switched off, and I'm using Boyum's B1 Up dashboard. So that's why this looks this way. I just prefer the Boyum dashboards, but that's definitely a choice. Anything that you develop in Boyum dashboards. So for instance, we've got a few dashboards here that are related to the aging of WIP in Airless, jobs close to budget, etc. These types of widgets can be recreated in the HANA dashboards as well. They're just built on standard views of the system, and we can typically build whatever dashboard widget or KPI or what have you, the same as it is in Airless, very similar in the HANA version. There are slight differences between the two tools, but by and large, for a lot of the important stuff, we can do it. So yeah, we've got a query here that relates to jobs, what have you. And what I like about this Boyum tool is you can do fun things like filtering and sorting. Like say for instance, based on job number, I can filter the column, what have you. So I just sort of like the widgets better. But we'll also kind of take a look now. So if you're a user of Business One, you're already familiar likely with all of these standard menus here, admin, financials, so on and so forth. And you're also likely familiar with a lot of these basic sales documents like the quote, the order, the return. Airless essentially enhances the jobs process and replaces some of these standard AR documents. So you can still use the basic AR sales quotation in SAP Business One the same way you would use it if you didn't have Airless. So we can create a quote if what you're quoting to a customer is fairly simple. Like let's say it's just a few lines and we just want to choose the customer and enter those lines. So let's see if we can find one of our customers. say Cameco, and we've got a, we're just quoting on a job that we know is so much labor. We can go ahead and we can say, okay, hourly service charge, and we're going to give that a 250 hours type thing. And we'll add that quote to the system. Okay, this standard SAP Business One sale quote can now be rolled into a job, and you can see that there's actually a create job button here at the bottom of the sales quote. So there's actually a few different ways that you can estimate your jobs if you're using Airless Job, and this is one way, just with a simple sales quotation. And if I hit this create job button, it's going to launch a wizard that allows me to automatically create the job I want. So in this particular case, it's a new job for our customer, Cameco. We can say what status, type, category. We can set all of these things so that they are transferred to the job. We could even say, okay, that's starting next Monday. It's due the following month. There we go. And as we progress through this, we can also choose, very similar like to the copy to, copy from functionality in SAP. If you're familiar with it, we can kind of choose what we copy over from the quote to the job, because you may not want to copy everything. And we can see that there's also actions that you can do after creating this quote, like closing the quotation here once a job is created. And we can also choose to launch the job that's created, upon creating the job there. So we'll just go ahead. You can choose the lines from the quote. So it's possible that you may have put other lines in this quote, like text lines or other additional charges or costs that you may or may not want to pass through. And this is where it's sort of a little bit like the copy from functionality in marketing documents. You can choose which lines you wish to move onto the job. But if we click finish, then it goes ahead and it creates the job in the background. Okay, so we're going to go away from that for a second. Just going to point out that we've got two additional modules in the Business One menu bar, job and rent. Rent is an additional module that was not as broadly used in the Airless community, but was written for rentals in the context of a job. Not the same kind of rentals as you would see, say, at Home Depot, or you're going to rent a tool at a place like Rona or what have you. It was originally written for job-based rental companies, like, let's say, for instance, scaffolding companies, which not only rent the pieces of equipment, but also do the work to erect the scaffolding and maintain it and tear it down, that sort of thing. That's why you see rent there. We're not going to demo that today. But if anybody's interested in what that does, feel free to send us a message. We'll tell you all about it. If I crack open the job module, you can see that there's a few fundamental, interesting menu items here. We've got what we call job management, or our job master. This is essentially the form that sets up the job information, right? Some people would call this a project charter. Some people would call it a job master or a project object. This essentially replaces the SAP Business One sales order. So you can start with an SAP Business One sale quote, move that into a job, and you don't really use a sales order anymore. Really what you're doing is you're establishing this job. This is what makes the commitment or the thing that we're managing. Airless has a two-level work breakdown structure, which means that we can have a sort of a two-level structure of job master and what we call sub-jobs. Now, the individual sub-jobs, other companies would use terms like work order or phase or ticket or what have you, but they're essentially sort of sub-buckets of the job. And every job needs one sub-job. It's the way that the system works. It's just set up that way. So when you're putting estimate lines into a job, that quote that we just uploaded into a job, there was actually a job number created and one sub-job automatically. And the quote lines go into the sub-job. They're all rolled up into the job. So if you've got a number of phases on a job or a number of work orders on a job, they'll all roll up into kind of one big job master. We'll see that right away. And then probably the last menu item that we'll focus on for today, some of these other ones down here, we're not going to get into too much for today's demonstration, but it's the My Jobs panel. So the things that I just described as far as jobs and sub-jobs, they start to really make sense once you crack open this My Jobs panel. And this My Jobs panel is essentially like a big job board. Like, you know, it's the replacement of the big whiteboards that you have on the wall with the grids that lay out all of the jobs that you've got in, you know, to do in various statuses or what have you. But you sort of filter and sort in real time. And, you know, typically you want to see jobs that are open, but you can also include inactive jobs as well. You know, you can see only jobs with work in progress, and we're just excluding sub-jobs for now. And here's where you choose to filter and sort what jobs you see in your list based on the status of the jobs, its type, its property, its category. The other thing I should point out too is that these descriptions of status or type or property or category, these are all user defined, which means that when you set Airless Job up, you get to choose what these mean to you. So status is normally used as a, you know, a progression of the job. Type can drive some accounting determination, and then properties and categories are sort of further things that are used to describe a job. Entered by, another way to say this would be the project manager or the project coordinator, the person that actually set up the job or is in charge of the job. So we're logged in as Jason today. He's our project manager. But you notice Buddy's name here too. Buddy's actually a crew chief that we use quite frequently. So if I was looking for a certain job, like actually before that, if I was looking for a list of all my jobs, I just click search without putting something in there, and I just simply get a listing of all jobs in sequence. And you can see that there's this job numbered 1044, new job for Cameco. This was the one that was automatically created based on the quote that we just added to the system. If I were to unclick this flag and include the sub-jobs that are below the jobs, basically what it does is it inserts all of the sub-jobs that are part of the job. You can see that, as I said, there's the one sub-job that was created underneath that new job for Cameco. Some jobs actually have a number of, or some jobs have a number of sub-jobs. Like this job number 1039 here, it actually has at least 9 or 10 sub-jobs underneath it. So these are individual buckets that can be used to break up further work. Now, when you're doing project management, there's a lot of companies that say, well, listen, we actually want a multi-level work breakdown structure. That is to say, you know, I want a master job, I want major phases, I want minor phases, and then activities. That's something that's, you know, typically seen in project management tools. Airless can actually, we have a little bit of a trick, an extension called analysis codes that allow us to sort of go maybe 2-level work breakdown structure plus 3 plus 4. But just so that everybody's aware, Airless Job wasn't really written as a multi-level work breakdown structure type of tool. So we've got a trick that extends it a little bit, but it's definitely a little different than our sister product, Airless Project. Okay. So that's good so far. So just basic orientation on the jobs. And if I want to open up the job master, like this new job for Cameco, I just click on a golden arrow, just like we would in other parts of the SAP system, and it'll launch it. So here's the job master. And from the sales quote, it automatically inserted Cameco as the customer, because that was the customer on the sales quote. It gave it the title that I gave it, and the statuses were sort of preset already, but again, we can set those. You also have the capability to enter job description, internal instructions. These text fields are free-form, but what you can also do is you can also prefabricate the type of descriptions for certain scopes of work. So if you've got a certain type of work that you do all the time, like standard hydrovac or standard survey, you can double-click this predefined text and it'll just insert it in here. I'm just going to choose a different example. It's probably more interesting. Let's say standard hydrovac. And you can see there's the title of the scope, and then there's a bit of a description, so on and so forth. There's a spell checker too, if your folks are bad spellers. Now, we didn't have an automatic bill to and ship to fill in, and it's actually because probably there's no bill to and ship to specified on the Cameco account. So we'll just do that real quick here. Bill to ship to. Okay, so normally you would have addresses defined on your business partner master. And I think if we go ahead and notice there's a refresh button on the job. So sometimes when you do things that are related to the job and you want it to come through to the job, it's just nice to use this refresh button, because I probably wouldn't have been able to pick the ship to of the customer and the bill to that I just set up until I clicked that refresh button. It sort of refreshes the data that's loaded behind this form. Okay, and then so we can specify ship to and bill to. Now on a job, a master job basis or a sub job basis, you can also specify individual ship to addresses. So what that means is that, let's say the ship to and the bill to here are kind of the master definitions. It's probably where the bill goes to for the job, like headquarters of the company you're working with. And in this case, it would be in Saskatoon. But let's say we have a number of different sub jobs. And if I click the sub job tab, you can see the listing of the sub jobs. Let's say I have a number of different sub jobs that are actually occurring in different locations across the country. There can actually, if I crack open the sub job, which looks very similar to the job, I can define different ship to addresses. So I could either pick from the business partner master, or I could just freeform say, this is happening in Rocanville, or this is happening in Cigar Lake, and here's the address. And those addresses are then carried through to the work order, so that later, if we're using one of the mobile tools that Eralis has, like Airless Anywhere, the person in the field using it on their tablet will actually be directed to the address of the sub job, of the work order. So that's sort of nice. I'll come back to this in a moment, the sub job, once we're done previewing what's here. We'll just go ahead and we'll say on a job, you can actually change some of this account determination. This is the default, so 9 times out of 10, you'll just use the defaults that are here. But just so that if we weren't, if we were doing something special, maybe we wanted the revenue or the costs allocated to a different account, we could do that. We could also specify a tax code just for the job. Forgive me, I'm in American localization here. That's why we're seeing American tax codes. But for all our Canadian friends, we can use branch and product line. These are also the branches as defined in Business One, and I believe the product line is one of the dimensions available in accounting. You can set unique payment terms for the job. I believe this is a field here to describe, say, a PO number that comes from your customer. Okay, so along with the ability to use Airless Job as an estimating tool, we saw sort of using a simple sales quote to populate a new job and populate the things within the sub job. So if I see the things that were, or if I click on this quote tab, that hourly service labor charge or the individual quote lines of all the sub jobs roll up into the master job. But we can also drill into the sub job to see those quote lines. So putting the quote lines in is done in the sub job, not the master job. So if you've ever gone into a master job and said, hey, why can't I import these? Why can't I input these quote lines? It's because it's done in the sub job, not the master. The master is just really a consolidated record. But there are some customers that use Airless where they only ever have one sub job. They don't have phases, they don't have work breakdown, and that's okay. So you need to put these in the sub job. That's the take-home message. So I can add these lines. So whatever method of quoting you use, Airless sort of consolidates that quote, that bill of materials, that that list of things that you've built up to try to cost out your job. It's all held within here, and then there's various ways and means that you can get it in here. So there are some of our customers who would prefer to use estimating tools that are more industry standard, that have industry standard terms, that maybe they've developed over time. There's a lot of customers that have very fancy, very large Excel spreadsheets that are really awesome, and there's a lot of logic that goes into them, and we typically don't try to reproduce that logic within Airless. What we do is we say, use that as your estimating spreadsheet outside the system, and then get those results into Airless Job. So what I mean by that, like, we could just simply use this form as an estimating tool where we go through and we say, okay, I've got some labor required, so S is staff type or labor. I'm going to add some materials to this job. Let's say I'm just going to pick, need to add a laptop. Where did I see that? There we go. Laptop battery. You know, there's some materials, fictional materials. We've also, you can see we've actually added some fields to Airless here to deal with metal. So this isn't a standard functionality of Airless, but you know, we had one customer that we were showing this to recently where it's like, well, we need to deal with metal materials and we need to add fields into the subjob that help us estimate metal, estimate our amount of scrap, that sort of thing. So this can be used as an estimating tool, but alternatively, if you have a external estimating tool or an Excel sheet that you're using, and the keyword is Excel, whatever your estimating tool is, if you can get the output into Excel or CSV format, that's awesome, because we've got a very quick and dirty way that we can integrate this with Airless. So let's pretend for a second that this Excel sheet was the output of an estimating tool. And we've got item number and quantity of the materials that are listed here. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy the item number and quantity of the first item there. And then I'm going to go over to Airless and I'm going to right click, sorry, in the second row, not the first. One moment. There's other ways to do this. I'm just sort of doing it through this means. We're going to go, you can also import from Excel clipboard. I'm sorry, I've got to update this subjob. My bad. Stand by. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to put my cursor in the item quantity, the item field. You see the quantity field's right beside it, and in the Excel sheet, it matched that. And I'm going to paste that in there, and we can see that the item and the quantity add. Now, this is actually an item that we don't have set up in SAP yet, but if it was, what would happen is that SAP would recognize that item code and add it in here. So that's the trick with this. The item codes in your estimating software and the output to Excel have to match what's in here, but when they do, once they do, then you can copy and paste from Excel right into Airless. Okay, so that kind of gives you a bridge. Now, there are more sophisticated ways to do this. Let's say, for instance, you have an estimating tool that spits out literally hundreds to thousands of lines of materials that are required. We will, in those cases, we'll provide customers with a solution that essentially allow you to import the CSV file, but more through a backdoor, so that you're not having to kind of manually copy and paste into here. So it'd be sort of taking an output like this and then loading it into a tool sort of similar to the ones that we use in Business One that are here, data import, but more so using the tool that we refer to as the data transfer workbench that allow you to kind of upload big amounts of Excel data right into here. And once you get this material information or the requirements information for the job, you then have the basis to sort of set your baseline. You may have produced a quote from your estimating software, and that's fine. But if you want to do budget or quoted versus actual performance of a job, you need to get these lines into Airless. Otherwise, you really have no basis for budget versus actual comparison. So this particular line, this labor that came from a quote, we've got a quantity of 250, and we have what we would consider the normal unit price of that particular work type and its cost. And I hadn't set up a cost, but on the fly I can override and I can say, well, the cost of that's actually 25 bucks an hour, and normally we charge 50 bucks an hour for that. So down here at the bottom, it's telling you sort of on a summary basis, you know, what's the total selling price of what's on this subjob, what's the total cost, margin, markup, what have you. Once we actually get into doing the job, then that'll provide us a basis for a comparison. So that kind of leads us to our next aspect of top 3 things to know about Airless Job, that Airless will actually track the actual cost coming in. What's here in the, we've called it job requirements in this on this form, but it's also called quote lines. What's here is actually the theory, not the actual. This is the budget baseline, this is the quote amounts or what have you, this is the estimate. Once we move to actually working on the job, we'll start to input things into this transactions area. So I'm just going to back out from this particular job. I'm going to jump into, like any good cooking show, I'm going to jump into a job that I've already done this on, and we're going to drill into this job 1013. Okay, and we're going to see that on this particular job 1013, we've got a number of different work orders. The quotes in those work orders are all rolled up here in the master job, so we can see what we've quoted on that job. And this is a bit of a raw return. You can see that there's this sub-job number, labor and materials, this sub-job number, and you can actually group this differently in Airless Job if you want to. So if you want to just simply group it by sort of line type, like see all the materials rolled up together, all the labor rolled up together, you can do it that way. Or, for instance, you could group it by, let's clear the line type grouping and let's see it by subjob or work order ID. So you can see, you can break it down by subjob. The other thing I should point out too is that on this particular line here, on this work order, you can see that there's a link to the original sales quotation that was used to sort of upload to the job. So we had started with the sales quotation in Business One by specifying a quantity of 1 hour of consulting time, and that's what led to this. All the rest of these we actually inputted by hand, but there you go. So this is our budget, this is our baseline. When we start to actually track these things, that's when the actual tabs, the actual transaction tab comes into play. And Airless Job will now track materials and expenses, staff timesheets, resource, which is usually means a piece of equipment, like a truck, a drill, or something that you would want to charge for and cost to the job. And you can see that it also includes rental equipment, that sort of thing. This is what's different between Airless Job and standard Business One. Not only the fact that it's got sort of a more robust quoting and estimating and baselining ability, but these transactions, Business One has started to build in the concept of timesheets into core Business One, but honestly, those timesheets don't really do anything. And Airless was designed quite some time ago to track individuals' time and cost it against a job. So if we actually drill into this section for labor, we can see a summary of all of the timesheets that are tracked on the job. So we've got some time for Buddy and some time for Alex, the type of work that they did, and we can see that it's standard time, so not overtime, not double time, the quantity that they logged to the job, and so on and so forth. And that's not to say that the job might just be fixed bid, but these sale prices and costs, standard costs, these are sort of normally what we would sell Buddy and Alex's time for, and normally what Buddy and Alex's time cost. And the cost of labor can be something standard, like normally the cost of apprentice surveyor is $30 an hour, but we can also override that and say, no, actually Alex's hourly cost is 45 or 50 or whatever it would be here, okay? How do timesheets and materials and expenses get on the job? Well, there's a number of ways that they can get on a job. You can track it simply by, as a job coordinator or job administrator going in here and launching this. At the bottom right-hand corner, I'm clicking on new timesheet entry. So, this is the SAP way, sort of the back, I often refer to as the back end way to enter timesheets. And, here we say, okay, I'm going to add some time to the framing work order, and this was buddy who did the time. Again, I'm doing this manual at this point in time, but frankly, there are other ways and mobile ways that this can get done to make this easier, just so that people, administrators aren't banging these in by hand. The other thing I should point out is that this timesheet can also be copied and pasted from other areas. So if I go to this "You Can Also" button in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see it's got a comment about things coming in from web batches. That's actually coming from the Airless mobile app that we use to track time through a web browser or in the field. But you can see that you can also import lines to this sheet through Excel transactions, very similar to the way we were able to input quote lines in a quote from an estimating Excel sheet. Okay, so there's a few different ways that time can kind of get in here and get entered, and these up here are presets. So if you're doing the time entry for this particular work order, you can set this default so that every time you add a new line, it just defaults to that. It's sort of a convenience feature. We can default the person, we can default the hours, so that if we're doing Buddy's time entry for the week, on different things, we can kind of quickly enter it in and just enters Buddy in as default. Okay, we can save these entries as a batch, and then they can be reviewed by other people before actually being posted to the system. And once they're posted, then they show up as costs on that transaction screen. So we're just gonna not save that here. So once those timesheets are posted, then they show up in the actual transactions. And these actual transactions are what we use as the basis for, budget versus actual reporting. The other place that, these entries will come, so transaction, like timesheet entries, materials entries, expense entries, is they also end up in what we call our job lines area, or sometimes people call it the invoicing area or the WIP area. This is all of the work in progress on a job. We'll come back to this in a second, but just so you know, once things actually hit the books in the transaction sheet, each one of those lines also shows up in this WIP area. So just hang on to that for a second. We'll come back to it. Now I want to jump to really quickly our web-based entry for this stuff, because what I'm showing you now is sort of the back-end administrators entry. Those people like project coordinators or accounting folks or payroll HR folks, they may be doing the timesheet entries through SAP through this back-end. But you also have the option to do the entries via this Airless Anywhere product. So Airless Anywhere is essentially a web-based extension of what we just saw. It's not a different program. Airless Anywhere is essentially a web-based representation of this. Of course, on the web, we don't quite have the same level of functionality. Like, we don't set up jobs on the web. We don't do accounting on the web, that sort of thing. This tool is really meant to do very straightforward things like, view the calendar of work order bookings, or take a look at the list of those subjobs that we have. I can actually do a quick search for the work order, for the job number. And if I know the Cameco job number and I just type it in here, 1013, it does sort of an auto suggest search, and it says, oh, okay, well, I didn't necessarily have to memorize the sub job number for stringing, let's say. So I pick that, and then I hit search again, and it comes up with that sub job, that work order. And what we can do now is we can click view, and what we're seeing here, again, is a web-based version of this. So if I open up the stringing sub job, I'm seeing that, but in a sort of a simpler and web-based version here. And again, you can't do absolutely everything on the web that you can do in the back end, but what I can do in the web is I can, view the, view the information on the work order, that site location. Again, if I was using this on an iPad and I clicked this, it would actually launch, Google Maps or what have you, or Waze or whatever you want. I can see the status of the work order. I can quickly change its status. But more importantly, I can also do time, material, and expense trackings on the job. So I can go ahead and I can add some time on this sub job. I'm logged in as Buddy. So when I click add time, I'm adding time as Buddy. But here's a trick. So let's say Buddy was the crew chief and got to the site at 8:30, worked till 11:30. So put that in there. So 3-hour duration, standard time. Now, all of the individuals in your organization can have access to this, but if really what you'd like to do is just have crew chiefs entering time for themselves and also on behalf of other people on their crew, Buddy can quickly say, yeah, Darcy and Victor are working on my crew today, or they're allocated to my crew normally. So I'm going to copy the time that I'm entering here over to those other two users' timesheets as well. And what we have is we've got a transaction booking of 3 hours for Buddy, 3 hours for Darcy, 3 hours for Victor on that particular job. Okay, I'm not going to go into the review and approval capabilities of Airless Anywhere today, but suffice it to say, area managers or supervisors or what have you can actually see the time and expenses and materials being entered on jobs and review them and either approve or reject them before they get pushed into here. So once that time comes in here, you know, the time that I just entered, you can see it's not here yet because actually we would have to run an approval process, but entering time here on the web is meant to end up here. Okay, so that's another possibility for time, expense, and material entry. Airless is currently working on another app called Airless Field. That is sort of a new user interface. It's a little bit more like the LEM-based entry or you know, ticket-based entry that you see in certain types of work, but that's due to be released later this year, and it'll likely augment what you see here. So stay tuned for that. All right, the last major thing that we want to talk about with you know, top 3 things to know about Airless Job is the fact that you can have diverse billing sort of schemes. So with Standard Business One, if you created a quote and created an order and went out and, you know, delivered on the work that you said you wanted to do, you can always sort of invoice those things straight up. You don't necessarily need a job management system to do that. But what Airless adds to the equation is being able to do more sophisticated versions of time and materials billing. In addition to that, Airless has a contract billing module that, you know, basically Standard Business One cannot do contract-based billing. So what do I mean by contract-based billing? I mean, anytime you enter into a job estimate with a customer or a job bid, and maybe what you're billing to a customer is not exactly the costs that are being tracked here. So it may be a fixed bid contract. You may have gone ahead and estimated everything that you're potentially going to be costing on a job and said, okay, I think the fixed bid is worth $250,000 or $500,000. And I'm going to bill my customer $500,000 for this job eventually, and that could be excluding change orders, but I'm going to bill my customer $500,000 for this job, and I'm going to bill that out based on certain progresses on the job or milestones or what have you. So in a moment, we're going to see the contracts module and how you can actually lay out that schema. On this particular job, we're just going to build this stuff out time and materials. So once work in progress, you know, hits the transactions module and ends up both here and here, we now have the basis to bill out what we've got on this job. So you can see that a couple of these lines are actually in the process state, and I can change what I'm seeing here. I can switch up this view to make it a little more nice to see. Let's just see here. Why don't we view this by, say, you know, work order, so you can see it by work order, or let's just back this off here. We could see it by type of, again, by item type. Okay, so you can actually filter and sort what's in your work in progress differently if you like. I'm just going to kind of use the standard view here, so that can help facilitate easier billing so that you can see what's going on here. And I'm going to just change the status of a few of these lines. So I've got a couple of lines that have already been processed onto an invoice. So they say processed as well. If I want to see the invoice that's associated with these lines, you can go down here to the bottom right-hand corner and you can click Show Documents. And these are all the documents attached to the job. So there's one AR invoice. And if I golden arrow into that, it's just like any other SAP Business One invoice. It gets raised through this. One thing to note, recently Airless has been working on the ability to not just raise an invoice from Airless Job, but also an SAP delivery. One of the reasons we're doing that is that so you can go ahead and kind of use the manual editing functions in the SAP invoice, because right now this invoice is just being automatically generated through code, and I can't, add a text line or whatever afterwards. So we're going to add the ability to do that as well. And of course, if I were to print preview this, it would look like any other invoice, but I can see things like credit memos and payments and whatnot. Also notice that, here's the total amount of cost and price and quantity of things in WIP, and over here, farther to the right. So I'm at the bottom here. Here's everything that's in WIP. And if I move over to the right, here's everything that's been processed. Not necessarily billed, but processed, because sometimes you want to do other things with this work in progress other than bill it. You might want to write it off. You might want to cancel and put things back, those types of things. So that's what these other statuses are meant to do. You can even split lines if you want to. Or for instance, we could actually bill for less of what was tracked or more of what was tracked. We do that all now. If I wanted to raise an invoice for these two materials on the job, I'd flip their status to ready to process, and then I'd go ahead and I'd select invoice job lines, and it would go ahead and it would raise an invoice. And once it's raised an invoice, it'll flip the status from ready to process to processed. And if I want to view the invoice, I can go ahead and I can launch Crystal Reports, which will take a second here. All right, there's the invoice. Of course, this will look like your invoices. And then if I want to also see the invoices on there, you can see I've got invoice 382, and then now there's a new one, 383. Okay, so that's how time and materials invoices are raised. And you can see there are other options, which we won't cover today, but if you want to invoice with recovery or pro rata or what have you, there are other options here, which we can, if you're interested in how to use those invoicing features, we can steer you towards the Airless knowledge base. And actually, I'll crack that Airless knowledge base open sort of at the end of the webinar here today. I'm going to jump to a job that has a contract. So 1013 doesn't have a contract. We're just invoicing time materials. I'm going to open up job 1012. And you can see there's a golden arrow that indicates it has a contract. But if a job has a contract attached to it, that is to say some sort of billing scheme that supersedes, just straight up time and materials invoicing, it'll have this flag here that it's a contract job. And if we want to access the job contract, there's a couple of different ways. We could simply click on this golden arrow in the job board, and that would take us directly to the contract. Or we can also go to the bottom right-hand corner here with the You Can Also button and just click Access Job Contract. This contract is where we set up the definitions of, what we're billing on the job and the phases on the job and what have you. So you can see this particular job has just got one phase, and we set up all of the phases here. And as we do billing, it'll add a line down here. So we can choose to, set up a total sort of contract for the job. And you can see that Airless says that based on what we've estimated using our estimating tool, we've roughly got about, $2,175 of what we'd normally charge for costs like that. I've decided to create a fixed bid for $3,400, and you can see what the costs, the labor costs, the other costs are anticipated on the job. This is the total contract value. Then we can break that $3,400 up into individual phases. So right now we just have one phase, but you could have multiple phases essentially. Like let's say, for instance, you took a deposit or a down payment on a job. 20%, 30%, you could have that as a phase, and then you would adjust the value here, not for the total amount, but you might say, okay, well, we'll take $1,200 on this job as part of the deposit phase. You can have progress phases or milestone phases where you are billing a certain amount of that total contract. And then you can also include things like retention. Now, you don't have to have a phase for retention. Notice how there's a retention, or another term that's commonly used, of course, is holdback. So holdback amount or retention amount. Let's say we had a final invoice line here for $2,500, and we indicated that there was a 10% holdback. Airless is smart enough to raise a final invoice that's actually $2,500 less 10%, and then remind you to bill the remaining holdback out at a time period or whenever, but it holds that amount open so that you know that you haven't built that retention yet. Okay, so this contract module, again, it allows you to manage all that. Fixed bid style contracts with multiple billing phases. You can see here the standard description of this field is actually variation, but another way of saying variation is change order. So it's possible that in any particular phase we had $1,500 worth of change orders, and we can do that here. There's a couple of different ways to handle change orders. Sometimes people simply handle change orders as a unique sub-job on the job, but there is a structure to essentially capture change orders within Airless and make sure that you bill those change orders out. And it probably goes without saying, but I will say it, you can have a combination of contract style billing on your jobs and time and materials billing. And oftentimes that time and materials billing is a good way to handle change orders. So you can create a variation here. Let's say there was a change order here and you wanted to actually bill for it in this line. That's kind of how we do that. Or you could completely separately create another sub job on this job called change order 1, and you can just bill that out time and material style. Suffice it to say, all of those various ways of billing, they're not possible in Standard Business One. So this is why Airless was created. So that this contract modules allows you to essentially separate the idea of revenue from billing. So there are some cases where customers will, of course, defer revenue recognition on things as part of the contracts module. That, in a nutshell, are some of the main differentiators of Airless Job. So we saw Airless Job, its role in estimating and the different ways that you can accommodate different estimating processes. We saw its ability to track costs on the job because, and this is often table stakes for us when we're implementing Airless with a customer, but it should be pointed out, the whole point of Airless Job is to track job by job, phase by phase, activity by activity, profitability, performance, so that are you winning on a job? Are you losing on a job? Are you expending too much costs? All of those things are important, either for on-the-fly decisions or retrospectively saying, okay, I need to shape up how we're estimating these types of jobs, because it's always running over by 10 or 15%. And then the last thing, of course, we saw is Airless Job's ability to handle different types of billing schemas, which is unique from the way that Business One does it. With Standard Business One, you can often do some workarounds that allow you to bill things like deposits and do certain forms of deferred revenue recognition, but honestly, Standard Business One doesn't really speak the language of job billing, job management, which is why Airless adds value. All right, so at that point in the webinar, I think I'll stop the formal presentation. We'll put it out there for questions. If anybody has any questions, we'll hang around a bit. Hey, Lisa, we'll wait for, I think there's a questions module in your fancy webinar tool off to the side, and you can somehow submit a question.
I don't see any questions yet, Rob, but we'll just wait for a couple seconds just in case.
Usually that means the presenter did such a fantastic job that just everybody knows how to use it and
Exactly what I was
go
thinking.
forward. Yeah, for sure. Obviously, some of the things that I've shown today are, they're demo system, they're prefabricated. We work with you to set it up properly so that it's, doing things that you would expect. There's a certain level of config and